Rightio, Geoff Lewis here again from Seriously Series. As you can see from this, I've had a very busy afternoon. The Series 3, I'm getting ready for the Perth 4-wheel drive show, which is on the 11th of November, if my memory serves me correct. And one of the issues that I'd noticed with the Series 3, and it was the second time that it's happened, you've got a transmission brake on your Land Rovers, and basically it's a drum that sits on the back of the transfer case. Now in there you've got a seal, originally would have been leather. I've put a neoprene seal in there, and there's a little fibre seal in there too, but I noticed it was leaking a bit of gear oil, so took all that apart, and the shoes that were in it were right down to the rivets, so I thought, well, I'll replace the shoes, replace everything, and then it's all brand new and I'd never ever have to worry about it again. So now I've finished that, I'm moving on to the next project. And this is the Capstan winch. Now, I have done a number of videos on the Capstan winch on this channel, and this is another one, but this should hopefully be the final video on actually overhauling the Capstan winch. So join me as I show you what I'm going to be doing on an Aeroparts Capstan winch. The simplicity and the unique engineering that goes behind this winch is out of this world, so stay tuned. Rightio, so the lighting isn't great, I do apologise for that, but it is a workshop, not a film studio here, and I'll work on that in the future. But the Capstan winch, yes, so a lot of work's been done on this winch. There really hasn't been anything, well, there's very little on the winch, I should say, that hasn't been overhauled. And when I put it back in the Series 3, I just sat it there because you always have a shed and you think there's heaps of space, but it fills up a bit quicker than you initially anticipate. And it was sitting there, and it's been sitting there for a while because I've fixed the water pump on the Series 3 and many other things. And I noticed it was leaking a bit of oil. And I thought, maybe this was when I'd pulled it apart previously, but it was actually one of the seals. So I got on to Finn at LR Winches, brilliant bloke. I've talked about him before in the past, and very knowledgeable, really easy to deal with, knows his stuff. Thoroughly recommend dealing with Finn, and he's got a great variety of parts, and he's got a fantastic range of winches too. Overhauled winches, so you can basically buy them, chuck them on your Land Rover, off you go. So brilliant. So I got onto him, and he was very good of him. He sent over some seals and some parts. Yes, I did pay for them, but anyway, so they rocked up probably about a month ago. So as I said, Perth 4-wheel drive show, you can't have leaking oil there, or at least not too much. It kind of raises a few questions, so I thought I'd better do the right thing and replace this seal. So anyway, I'm going to disappear off camera, and the Aeroparts winch is going to take centre stage. So give us one moment. Okay, so here's the winch. Now, the simplicity of this winch compared to, I'll just turn you up a little bit so you can actually see me while I explain. The simplicity of this winch is just brilliant. I love simple solutions to complicated problems. One of the examples is the Americans spent millions of dollars developing a pen that could operate in zero gravity, which a lot of people think was designed for the Apollo missions and the Mercury missions, but in fact one of the key reasons behind it was that planes and bombers flying at high altitude could write in ink. But the British, the Russians, and pretty much everyone else just went down to supplies and got a pencil sharpener and chucked that in instead. Anyway, so simple solutions to complicated problems are just fantastic, and the Aeroparts Capstan winch is very much one of these. I've showed the internals of this in a previous video, so I'm not going to go into that. But basically, you've got the turret, you've got a shaft that runs through here. Either side, you've got a seal to keep or attempt to keep the oil in. It is a Land Rover or British made piece of machinery. Now, I didn't film pulling all this apart because, as many of you know, and I'm sure many of you can sympathise, it can sometimes be quite a lengthy task actually pulling something apart. If you watch these restoration shows on Netflix and TV and all the rest, they restore a whole car in a day. It's that easy. In reality, I can tell you it's not. So anyway, what you've got is this plate that sits on here, like so. And I won't try and get it in just yet. So you've got that there. Okay, it went in. You've got a lock washer there, and that sits on here like so. That's close enough for the purposes of the video. And then you've got a dog clutch, which is this here. So that's basically there so you can put your crank handle into it. So if you actually, and this is a great little party trick, if you engage the Capstan winch and you put a steel shear pin in, not a brass shear pin, steel shear pin, you'll actually be able to turn the motor over. Now, one of the issues with this is that your crank handle is actually too long, because it's designed to go in about probably a metre or so, probably about that much. But with the Capstan winch, you've only got about that much. So there's a couple precarious ways of doing it, and one that I've read is getting a helpful friend. Helpful friends are very important, but sometimes hard to find, and they can simply cup the crank handle in their hands, and you can turn it over. I don't know how true that is, but I wouldn't be game to try it. Maybe I'm not such a helpful friend after all. The other one is I've heard someone putting virtually like a peg in the ground, and it's got like a clasp that comes over the top and you bolt it in. Either way, it's quite a lot of work just to start a car with a crank handle, so I think it's probably easier just to make sure that your car's well tuned, chock the wheels, jack the back wheel up and just start spinning it over in top gear, and you'd probably start it with a lot more ease. But anyway, that's what that's for, and that simply screws on here. I'll try and get it to sit there anyway. Right, so that's basically it. And then we've got a bearing in here which uses ball bearings. It doesn't use tapered roller bearing. It isn't a tapered roller bearing. And I'm presuming you've pretty much got the same on the other end. Now the seal on this side is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Should I replace it? Yes, I probably should, but this one's the culprit at the moment. That one seems fine, so I'm going to deal with this one first. So what I've done is, obviously the first thing I've done is I've knocked the tab flat, because otherwise it just makes your life a lot harder trying to get it off, and you end up destroying your lock washer, because you can actually use these twice. And then what I've done, look, Oscar, Harry and Stanley aren't here today. It's not really OH&S safety, this. I've got the winch, I've got the shaft locked in a vise so I could get it on with the Stilsons, because I didn't have a shifter that was big enough to actually fit on this, and I didn't have a impact socket or a long deep socket that could actually fit over this either. So I did something very dangerous. I used my initiative. So be careful there. So anyway, I've locked the shaft in there. I knocked the tab flat, as I said, and then I've simply got a pair of Stilsons, and because this actually isn't done up that tight, the preload isn't that much, Stilsons were fine. They actually didn't damage it. Okay, so don't stress. It's not too bad. So that actually came off with relative ease. Then I've slowly just had a little screwdriver and just very gently Just going around like what I'm doing here, and just slowly levered it off. It's, you know, you got to remember that this is an aluminium manganese alloy, and it's, you know, probably close to at least 40 years old. So, you know, aluminium's fantastic in the sense that it doesn't rust, but it does corrode. So even if you know, I don't know, if you're looking at getting an MG or a Tirana or something like that, and it's got the original mags on it, you want to be a bit careful, because you can actually get oxidization of the actual alloy itself, and it tends to turn to powder, and they don't really have a huge amount of strength. So you don't want to go in with this with a huge hammer and start smashing and bashing away, because you're going to crack it. It's very difficult to weld, and it just ends up leaving you in a world of hurt. Now behind this here, you've got a little spacer, this here too, and that sits virtually on the bearing itself. Now it doesn't look too bad in here. I can see that a little bit of water's got in here at some stage, but for the age of the winch and wherever it's been in its life, it looks pretty good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to clean up this here, because you've got a small little seal just in there. And what we're going to do is we'll get a socket roughly around about the same size, and we're just going to pop that out, pop a new seal in, and hopefully that's all we have to do. And the Capstan winch will therefore be back up and running again. Good stuff. So one of the issues that happens with a lot of these seals is they don't necessarily wear out round the lip. I'm just cleaning this out while I'm talking to you. Multitasking, you could say. It's not usually the lip of the seal that goes. What happens is it can actually corrode in, and that's actually what's happened here. You can see the rubber on the outside has completely and utterly disintegrated around there. The other thing is too, and you'll find this pretty much with any, you know, mature piece of machinery, they will leak oil. And the reason why they leak oil is if they've got neoprene or rubber seals in it, they do actually go brittle over time. So if you are getting an old Landy or a more mature Land Cruiser or whatever you're looking at doing, don't just go, oh, it's not leaking oil now, it'll be fine, because you'll probably go on your first run and I can guarantee this, you'll at least find probably half a dozen other oil leaks. So if you've got the time, make the time to actually go around your vehicle and change the seals, change your stub axle seals, change your input and output seals on your gearbox or your transfer case and all the rest, because it saves you so much aggravation, and you get a chance to actually enjoy the motoring experience of that vehicle, instead of, you know, rocking up somewhere and having the rather embarrassing situation of people pointing out that your car's just dripping oil all the way down the street. Right, so we're going to have to get serious here. We're going to have to get a big socket and put it in there and give it a little tap to get it out. So I'll just go get some tools. Okay, so I've gone for a 1" 1/8 socket there. And what I'll do is, at the end of this video, is I'll actually put in the content section down below, I won't do an end screen, I'll put it in the content section down below, the parts and the socket size that I actually use. So if you need to do this yourself, you can. So this is proving to be a bit stubborn, so we're going to get a bit serious here. So we'll move the Capstan winch out of the way. Now these do actually weigh quite a bit, so be careful when you're moving it around your workshop. I'll just move the camera. Okay, so I've got the socket on this side. We want to push the seal out this side here. So As I said before, the alloy is quite old, so we're going to go very, very gentle on this. And I can see it on this side here, so we'll just push just gently. That's slowly coming now. Now what I can do is I can actually leave this here, and this is a club hammer. I'm not going to bash the crap out of it, but if you just, even if you're on a press and something isn't coming out quite as easily, just give it a few taps. And it's amazing, the actual vibrations. I don't know what they do exactly, but it just moves the steel around or the alloy around a little bit, and it actually helps to free it up a bit. So that's a good little trick that I've learnt from a few people over the years. Now that's starting to get a little bit flush there, so now we've got a bit of movement. Hopefully it should come out with relative ease. Now I'm not going to bash this really hard, I'm just going to give it some little taps like so. So I'm using the weight of the hammer, I'm not exerting any force other than the weight of the hammer. And you can see that's slowly coming out now, and there we have it. And we've kept it completely and utterly intact. So you can see the condition of the seal there, it's pretty rank. That is a technical term, rank seal. So what I'm going to do now is I'll clean this up with a bit of degreaser, make it look nice and presentable, and I'll put a new seal in it. Anyway, I'll leave you for a moment and get that sorted. Okay, so the Capstan winch is back. Sorry, we'll get you up a little bit more so you're not just seeing a bunch of weird hands throughout the whole video. So we'll clean this up a bit as best we can. I'm going to get in there with a wire brush. I really do love a good wire brush. Now we have got this in here. Yes, I need to be careful not to get a bunch of gunk and crap in there. Someone's already previously used Celastic here, so just scrape that off best we can. The reason why you do that, and look, I know most of you probably know half this stuff already, but for those of you who don't, having a nice clean area to actually put your gasket, paper, Celastic, whatever you're using, cork, is really, really important. You know, it comes down to the old principle of do it right, do it once. You know, if you're going to spend all that time, there's no point cutting corners, and look, we all do it and we all learn from it too, so see, that just brings it up nicely there, like that. Now I just find a flat bladed screwdriver really does a good job. I'm not pushing hard on it, and I'm not putting it on an angle. You do not want to put it on an angle because you'll actually score the surface. So I'll get in there with a nice rag and give that a bit of a clean up. So that's there. Got this other one which is a bit longer. That's looking pretty good, pretty happy with that, so we'll get a rag. Now something I use and something I keep in my Land Rovers, going off topic a little bit here, but this is it's a little bit like chucks. And this actually comes in a nice big roll, and you can just chuck it in the back of your car. Doesn't cost a lot either. So you can use it to clean your dishes or clean your Land Rover. So, you know, you've got all your bases covered. That's it, multi-purpose, that's what it's all about. So look, this is looking pretty smick. I know I keep saying that, it sounds like we're on a cooking program here, but it is looking pretty good. So what I'm going to have to do now is just give that a bit more of a touch up. I'll get some Celastic and we'll get this bad boy fixed up. Okay, so I went and got a bit of a munted tube of Celastic, and I've cleaned this up. Now, sometimes you can actually get a little bit of a residue. The reason why I'm looking up here is I find throttle body cleaner really works well. Really good degreaser, it just doesn't leave a residue and it cleans it up quite nicely. So that's a good one to keep in the shed. Right, so what we're going to do is we'll put a little bit of Celastic on here. Now, something I haven't got round to is getting a set of or a box of neoprene gloves, because you really don't want to be doing what I'm doing here, which is using my skin and finger to actually spread all this lovely silicon and hydrocarbons and all the rest. It really isn't good for you. So don't, if you can avoid it, get yourself a set of gloves and don't do what I'm doing. So, but you know, no one's perfect, and sometimes you have to do what you have to do. So we'll just get that nice and even around there the best we can, like so. Get a bit on here, just smear that slightly. You want to avoid bolt holes with Sisaflex, because what happens, this is why I like paper, is what tends to happen is the Sisaflex gets pushed in when you put your bolt in, and it ends up gumming up the thread, and you've got to get in there with a really fine little screwdriver or a needle and actually dig it all out. So I haven't had that happen on the Capstan winch. I had that happen on the Series 2 a few moons ago, so that's always a problem. So we'll pop this in, make sure we've got all the parts in. Right. Wipe the residue off, like so. I'll just zoom you in a little bit because we'll be doing a bit of intricate work. Right, so we've put this plate on. Now, a good way, and this is something that probably many of you think, oh, I couldn't really stuff that up, but believe me, we all do. Part numbers here for this flange. Part numbers go up. It's a bit hard to read them upside down, so make sure you keep that in the back of your mind when you do it. Okay, and now we've got the bolts here. Now, I'm not putting Loctite in. Some people might say, oh, you should put Loctite in it. No, that's what spring washers are for. That's why you put things in at the right torque setting and all the rest. Because it just makes life an absolute pain when you're trying to take it all apart. So I'd recommend not to do that. That's, once again, my opinion. Right, so we've got to line that up, so I'm going to get a little screwdriver. By pushing it into where the thread should go, it should hopefully get it pretty sorted. It can be really fiddly, these tasks, and you say, oh, it's only going to take 15 minutes, 15-20 minutes, and you're still there 2 hours later. So I think this might be the case, so I'm going to leave it here, or leave you here for the moment, and I'll get this all sorted. Now these are the original bolts, so you got to keep in mind that you don't want to go too hard on them, and it's going into an alloy, so the thread's quite coarse, and if it's quite coarse, then that can spin quite easily, so you need to keep that in mind. So we're going to put the locking tab back on, like so, and then we're going to put the dog clutch on like so. Ta-da! Now to tighten it up, yes, I'm going to go use a rather unorthodox way of doing it and use a pair of Stilsons, and I'll zoom you out for this. You should use a deep socket or an impact socket for this, but for what I've got in this garage or workshop at this point in time, this is going to have to do. That's done up. Now, how tight do you do it? That's the question. So, you know, how tight should I actually do the dog clutch here? Well, this is something I've learnt too. When you're taking something apart, don't just get fixated with stripping it to bits. Take photos, make marks with chalk, pen, all the rest. But one of the things is actually make note of how tight things are. You know, is it done up really tight? Is it nearly falling off? How tight do you think it should be? This is really important. Now, some pieces of machinery that I've worked on in the past, I haven't been able to get the specifications that I've needed. So I've actually got the torque wrench and I've just sat it on there and just turned it up a little bit. Okay, hasn't moved it, a little bit more, hasn't moved it, a little bit more, hasn't moved it. And then finally, moves it. Okay, right, so it's round about, you know, let's say 85 foot-pound or 85 newton meters, and therefore I know how tight I should do it up next time. Rough rule of thumb, very rough, I know, but if it gets you out of trouble, you know, it's somewhere to start anyway. So that's what I've done here. So that's all sealed up now. I now need to put it back in the car, put some nice fresh oil in it, some SAE 90s going into this one. You can put thicker oil in it. A devout follower of ours has mentioned that, and it does work much better in extreme hot climates, but for the amount of use that this vehicle gets, or the winch gets, I think SAE 90 will be more than sufficient. Anyway, look, I hope you've enjoyed this little interesting video on what you can actually do on your Aeroparts Capstan winch. If you want to see more videos like this, please join us on Patreon, and if you want to see more content like this cropping up in your emails and all the rest, click on the subscribe button, click on that notification button, and I hope to see you in our next video.